I'd like to introduce Professor Heather McGregor, the Executive Dean of the Edinburgh Business School, which is based at Heriot-Watt University. Heather has done many things: businessman, author, and journalist, and she has pronounced views. For example, on executive pay, Heather said there isn't such a thing as too much or too little. Or on the complaints about the high levels of executive pay, she said, anybody over the age of 7 who says that things are not fair needs a reality check. Wonderful stuff. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Professor Heather McGregor.
First of all, I should start, of course, with an apology. Not for the things I've said in the past. If you go on the internet, you will find any manner of outrageous things that I've said along the way. But actually, for the fact that I'm not Martha Lane Fox. And I know that a lot of you will have come here today to hear Martha, and she was meant to be the designated woman on the panel today. Martha is a friend of mine. She has, her father writes on the Financial Times as our gardening correspondent. And she is, as many of you will know, she had a very bad car accident back in the mid-2000s. And as a result, her health isn't everything it could be, and so she couldn't be with us today. But when I was asked on Tuesday to come and be Martha and to be her avatar, I did think to myself, what are you going to think? She is, let's face it, I'm 11 years older than her. I'm not nearly as clever as she is. I'm not nearly as pretty as, and beautiful as Martha. And the really worrying thing is, of course, that I'm not nearly as slim. Now, you may think that I'm a little bit fixated about my weight, but let me just share with you why these things end up happening. For a start, some of you may know that in the run-up to Christmas, I was on Celebrity Come Dine With Me. And I wasn't actually in the country, and you can't get Channel 4 where I was. And so the only reason I knew that it had gone to air was because somebody tweeted, Mrs. Moneypenny has a backside the size and shape of Paraguay. One does question why Paraguay, but anyway. I write and present television as Mrs. Moneypenny rather than as Heather McGregor. That's why that was used. But back in 2012, I published my big careers book. So I've written quite a few books, but back in 2012, on the back of helping to launch something called the 30% Club, which campaigns for more women on boards, which Helena Morrissey and I set up in 2010, I put all my best careers advice down into one book, and it came out in the January of 2012, and you will all know that these days when you produce a book, most of it's sold on Amazon. And Amazon put on Amazon the kind of book that you should buy with this book. And so my book was Careers Advice for Ambitious Women, and Amazon chose a book to go next to it. Now, I know it's not a personal thing. I know it's an algorithm that makes that choice. And I do try not to take it personally. But for the first 12 weeks that this book was on sale, it was on sale with an exercise book called Run, Fat Bitch, Run. But I stand here on the Adam Smith Festival of Ideas platform under a portrait of the great Mr. Smith, great Professor Smith, we should call him, because I am now, I have my dream job, which is I got to come back to Scotland and to be the Dean of the Business School of Heriot-Watt University, which confusingly, from brand terms, is called Edinburgh Business School, but is actually the 25-year standing business school of Heriot-Watt. And it's a very unusual business school because most of our students, a bit like Jerry's customers, are not actually in Scotland. I have 12,000 current students. I define a current student as somebody who has taken an examination within the last 4 exam quarters. They are in 166 countries. They're certainly not all in England. We are a distance learning business school. If you study for an MBA at the Edinburgh Business School, you can study either in your bedroom in Botswana or with one of the 23 places that we license to teach our things, or you can study here in Edinburgh or on our campuses in Dubai, Malaysia. But wherever you study, you will sit your exams at one of 530 exam centres we set up around the world with the British Council, who are absolutely our invaluable partners in this. And so we examine all over the world. There's no other business school like it in the world. We describe ourselves as the most popular MBA in the world. And like Jerry's business, I run a global business, and I run it from Scotland. And the people who devise the ideas and write the courses and teach it and administer it are here in Scotland. So for me, this is the reason that I'm here today. I'm not here because I did 2 seasons of stand-up comedy at the Edinburgh Fringe, which I did in 2010 and 2013. I'm not here because I was on Celebrity Come Dine With Me. I'm here as the person who leads an organisation that is educating 12,000 people around the world. And also, we have graduated over 25 years. I mean, Heriot Watt's been going since 1821, but the business school's been going for 25 years, and we have graduated 21,000 people. And there's another special reason I'm here today, is that in 2008, on the back of the success of the MBA and of the surplus we had made as a charity over many years, we bought Panmure House. And so now I am the custodian, not just of the brand, around 21,000 people's degrees, not just as the educator of 12,000 people in 166 countries, but of the house in Edinburgh that Adam Smith moved into with his mother, actually, in 17, I think if you look in the timeline in your brochure, he moved in 1778. And he lived there until he died in 1790, and he's buried metres away in Canongate Churchyard. When I joined Edinburgh Business School at the beginning of September, everything had stopped for 2 years at that point. We were nowhere near getting Panmure House finished. I'm delighted to say I spent my first 6 weeks utterly dedicated to sorting this out. And we broke ground again in October of last year, and we will open next year for public consumption, and we hope to be very much joined up with the foundation and with the Adam Smith Trail and with the University of Glasgow and everywhere else that Adam Smith went. I mean, he lived in the 1700s, and he was incredibly well-travelled. And he also lived till 67, which in the 1700s was a very old age. And so I'm here today just to put 2 ideas into your mind. Whatever happens about change, and, whether we're in or out of the Union, whether we're in or out of Europe, whatever happens, there are 2 absolutely guaranteed things, I tell you, about the year 2025, which is the year that Alistair originally asked me to think about. One is Scotland will have an older population. So right now there are about 3.5 million people in work in Scotland, and there are about 1 million people who are retired. By 2025, there'll still be about 3.5 million people in work in Scotland, according to current projections, but there'll be 1.5 million retired and older people. And so older people will become the workforce of the future. And of course, what will facilitate that, especially if you live in a more remote part of Scotland, will be the internet and technology, which we all need. I need the internet globally to educate 12,000 people in places from Botswana to Bhutan. 2 weekends ago, I was in Myanmar teaching 60 students, learning Scottish ideas and Scottish education in Myanmar, in Yangon. And I need the internet to make that happen, and technology to make that happen. And so older people, when I wrote Careers Advice for Ambitious Women, I actually wrote in here 3 case studies of 3 women in Scotland who had re-qualified and were in new jobs at the age of 60. Now, Gordon Brown has a 6 in front of his age. Jerry Grimstone has a 6 in front of his age. Do they look to you like the kind of people who are sitting around doing nothing? No. And both of them are actually exactly like the people of the future. We will all be working until we are 70s and 80s. If you're under 30 now, you will almost certainly live to be 100. There's a very good website called The 100-Year Life, which is the website of the book written by my girlfriend Linda Grattan, where you can go on and actually there's a diagnostic, which I commend to all of you, that shows you how well prepared you are for a 100-year life. It's free. You just go and click all the answers and it will tell you. And if you think about Scotland in the future, we know there will be more older people. We know that the key to keeping older people engaged in the workforce, and I'm going to be 55 next week. I'm very much approaching it. This is my 3rd career in my life, and I've just started it. And what will be key will be re-educating. Education will be key to this completely. So for the population, the 1.5 million retired people in Scotland in 2025, many of them will have been re-educated and will be doing new things in the so-called gig economy, will be being useful and supportive of the Scottish economy. Many, many more than today. And the second thing I predict with absolute certainty is that Scotland, as it was in the 1700s, and the 1600s, and in the 2100s, will continue to be a net exporter of ideas. That's what Adam Smith was. He was an ideas person. He never actually proved any of his ideas, and in fact he comes in for a lot of criticism by some academics for the fact that he didn't spot the Industrial Revolution, which was going on about 10 miles down the road from here. But he had fantastic ideas exported all over the world. And everywhere I travel, we own a first edition of The Wealth of Nations. And I almost feel sometimes like taking it out around the world because people are so interested in it. People all around the world look to Kirkcaldy and look to Scotland as the home of the greatest ideas that have ever been and the ideas that have transformed the world. And so I see myself as a custodian of Panmure House and as a custodian of education, of Scottish education, as the head of an export business. And education and ideas will be a hallmark of Scotland in 2025. I want to just finish by sharing a couple of stories with you. One of which to show you a little bit about what it's like to be the custodian of Scottish education and the export of Scottish education, and one of which what it's like to be the custodian of Panmure House. So back in 1968, which was 6 years after I was born, a little baby boy was born in Somalia. His name was Hassan. His family eventually became refugees. And somewhere in the 1990s, at the outbreak of the civil war in Somalia, they left Somalia, and they were one of the very fortunate families of refugees that found another home, and they found that home in Norway. And so young Hassan found himself in Norway, where he, I don't think, spoke a word of Norwegian at that time, but he got up to speed pretty quickly, and he ended up at the University of Oslo doing an undergraduate degree there. After he graduated, he went to work in humanitarian movement, and particularly in the Norwegian refugee humanitarian state aid organization. And he decided that he should aspire to upskill himself, and particularly in the world of management. And so he chose to do an MBA at Heriot-Watt through the Edinburgh Business School. And so today, Hassan, he graduated in 2001. I looked up his student record last week when I knew I was coming to see you, and he actually did very well in all his exams. He sat his exams at the British Council in Oslo, and his ideas and his thinking are now, we assume, 15 years later, heavily shaped by his MBA and by the management ideas of people like Adam Smith and other Scottish academics whose work he studied and whose exams he sat and who marked his exams. All the exams come back to Scotland, and we mark them here in Scotland. 2 weeks ago, Hassan, and his name, by the way, his full name is Hassan al-Khairi. Hassan was named as the Prime Minister of Somalia. Somalia is facing, as you will probably know from the newspapers and the television, an almost unprecedented famine, another one. So now we have somebody who is overseeing a real humanitarian crisis of a proportion that probably hasn't been seen in Scotland for some centuries. And we know how he was educated. He was educated from Scotland. So that export of ideas is something that I firmly predict will continue from educational institutions, not just ours. We're special because we are educating people in lots more countries than anybody else, but so many other people come to Scotland. And in fact, I hope this year to launch an MBA where people will come to me, to Scotland from all over the world. But the fact that we have a Prime Minister operating in a challenging part of the world who's Scottish educated is again something that doesn't hit the headlines. But to me, that shows me what the Scotland will be like in the future. It will be a net exporter of ideas. And so then let me share with you one thing that for me is about being the custodian of Panmure House. So as I said, Adam Smith's book was entirely intuition. he didn't have a massive data set. He used some examples, of course, some very famous examples in his book, particularly about pins, and people saying, why did he talk about pins when he had candles down the road and so on? But he actually, as I said, he had some amazing ideas which have turned out to be right. Back in 1972, the Nobel Prize for Economics was awarded to somebody called Ken Arrow. Ken Arrow was a professor at the University of Stanford, and he got that prize in 1972 for proving, through the use of data, the work of Adam Smith. In fact, I'll read to you from his obituary, Ken Arrow. Two achievements are particularly celebrated: his impossibility theorem about the paradox of social choice, and his welfare theorems, which formalize the most famous intuition in economics, Adam Smith's idea that a market produces social good from individual selfishness. So Adam Smith's ideas were producing Nobel laureates in 1972. They're producing prime ministers in 2017. What are they going to do for the future? But they are going to be amazing. We are going to launch a scholarship in the name of Ken Arrow for people. When we finish Panmure House next year, the first PhD students will come and study there, and it will be open to the public. We will have an exhibition. Our copy of The Wealth of Nations will be there. And I hope, therefore, for the next 5 years, which is the duration of my contract, to be the custodian of Scottish educational export and of Panmure House in a way that produces for Scotland something that we have long been proud of for 100 years, and we will in the future, which is the ability to stand up and be counted a bit more than any other nation in the world as a place where brilliant ideas start and develop. If Martha was here, I'll tell you what Martha would have focused on. She would have talked about the power of the internet. She, like me, believes in the power of the internet. And she would have also talked about, as she talks about on her website, if you go and look at it, she talks about the opportunity for the UK to lead in the area of technology and the internet. I put it to you that the power of the internet will be the power of the future because of its ability to re-educate our older population and because of its ability to export our ideas. But I put it to you that it's not the whole of the UK, actually. It will be Scotland. And whether we're part of it or not, whether we're part of Europe or not, this country will be the country that develops the best ideas in the world. Thank you.